I wish I had the strength to get rid of him." Those words came from Ron Howard, the man Hollywood lovingly calls the nicest director in America. But during a recent chat with Rolling Stone magazine, his eyes weren't as kind as usual. He talked about 6 people, each one connected to a story, a painful memory in his career that he says he's never forgotten. Some of them caused his movies to be banned in many countries. One famous person made such a big mistake that the Vatican, the leader of the Catholic Church, demanded an apology from both the movie team and Howard. And another one forced him to hide bad behavior toward a female co-star. So who are these 6 stars? And which one made Ron Howard so angry that he said words he had never said in his whole life? 1. Tom Hanks. Turning his back on the movie Ron Howard cared about like his own child. On a morning in June 2022, Hollywood was shocked when the New York Times published an interview with Tom Hanks, the man who everyone saw as America's good guy, bluntly called the Da Vinci Code movies. He starred in hooey nonsense scavenger hunt type. Nonsense. That phrase basically means a pointless treasure hunt. A movie series that people once called a smart blockbuster was being called trash by its own main actor. Hanks said even more. It was a money-making business rather than a piece of art. And by the 3rd movie, it wasn't even a good money-making business anymore. The comment shocked the movie industry not because it criticized a film, but because it hurt Ron Howard deeply. He was the director who had spent over 10 years on the 3 movies: The Da Vinci Code, 2006, Angels and Demons, 2009, and Inferno, 2016. To Howard, this wasn't just a film project. It was a child he had raised with his reputation and passion. To understand why those words hurt so much, we need to go back to 2005, when the crew arrived in Paris to film the first scenes inside the Louvre Museum. Getting permission to film inside the home of the Mona Lisa painting was almost impossible. Howard spent over 6 months talking with the French Ministry of Culture, agreeing to dozens of strict privacy rules. The filming schedule went up to 18 hours a day. A crew member told Entertainment Weekly that Hanks was so tired he had to change his costumes right inside the Mona Lisa gallery to stay on schedule. He didn't even have energy to talk. The story sounds funny but shows how much extreme pressure everyone was dealing with. When the film premiered at Cannes Film Festival in May 2006, reactions were explosive in the U.S. Catholic groups like Opus Dei called for boycotts, accusing the film of twisting their faith. Governments in Egypt, Jordan, Syria, Lebanon, and Pakistan banned it completely. The Guardian newspaper wrote, "A movie meant for entertainment has ended up touching one of the deepest cultural wounds." Ron Howard, who had always been seen as calm and friendly, suddenly found himself in the middle of religious controversy. During all the uproar, Tom Hanks, the main face of the movies, started avoiding questions about religious topics. On BBC Newsnight, he said simply, "This is a work of fiction, not real beliefs." But the public wasn't satisfied. A critic from the New York Times wrote, "It feels like Tom Hanks doesn't believe in the film he's in." That was the first visible crack in his friendship with Howard. On set, they had once been so close that Howard called Hanks, "my eyes on the set." They had celebrated birthdays together in the Louvre's Grand Salon. But by Angels and Demons, their working relationship grew distant. A crew member told Vanity Fair magazine, "They didn't argue, but they weren't the same friends they used to be." Hanks's 2022 comments were seen as a delayed stab in the back. People magazine wrote, "This isn't a film review. It's a rejection of his own past." Some movie insiders suggested Hanks was distancing himself from the commercial image of the Da Vinci Code to strengthen his artistic reputation, coincidentally while promoting Elvis, which critics praised as a return to form. The story became even more sensational when the media dug up Hanks's past incidents. In 2004, footage came back from a charity event showing him in a controversial moment, minor at the time but made bigger years later, forcing Hanks to apologize in Vanity Fair in 2012. When placed next to his dismissal of the Da Vinci Code, the public saw it as a bigger attempt to wash his hands of past controversies, including the very film that made him hundreds of millions of dollars. Although the three movies made over $1.5 billion worldwide, its image today is that of a beautifully packaged commercial franchise. Howard, who once proudly said at a Rome Press event, "I told this story with all my heart," became symbolic of art serving the market. Hanks, by putting down the films, accidentally suggested that Howard had chosen a path he no longer wanted to walk. Yet behind Hanks's cold words, you could still sense the trace of a long friendship. Together, they had made Splash, 1984, and Apollo 13, 1995, projects that defined both careers. Perhaps that's why this turning away hurt so deeply. It wasn't from an enemy, but from a lifelong friend. And just as the storm between Hanks and Howard began to calm down, another scandal appeared, this time involving a comedian whose single line in a trailer sent shockwaves through Hollywood. 2. Vince Vaughn, the improvised line that shook Hollywood. In the fall of 2010, when Universal Pictures released the first trailer for The Dilemma, no one expected that a 6-word line would send Hollywood into chaos. In the opening scene, Vince Vaughn, the funny star of Wedding Crashers and Dodgeball, looked straight into the camera and said, "Electric cars are gay." At first, it sounded like a typical Vaughn-style joke, bold, teasing, and politically incorrect. But within hours of the trailer hitting YouTube, social media and the press exploded. Major news outlets from CNN and Variety to The Guardian condemned the line as offensive. Advocacy groups such as GLAAD accused the film of making harmful language seem normal. On the October 8, 2010 episode of Anderson Cooper 360, the veteran journalist said bluntly, "When people use language like that as a joke, it teaches kids that it's okay." His statement turned a film controversy into a nationwide debate over comedy, responsibility, and speech. Just 4 days later, Universal pulled the trailer, and all eyes turned to Ron Howard, the film's director and co-producer. At the time, he was in Chicago deep in post-production, fielding endless calls from studio executives, journalists, and lawyers. An article by Patrick Goldstein in the Los Angeles Times titled, "What Should Ron Howard Do About Vince Vaughn's Line?" placed him in an impossible position. Either cut the line to appear proper or keep it to defend creative freedom. A week later, instead of staying silent, Howard wrote an open letter published in the Los Angeles Times' The Big Picture column. He explained that Vaughn's character, Ronnie, was someone who speaks first and thinks later, and that the line reflected the character's personality truthfully. Outlets like Entertainment Weekly and The Guardian praised the letter as a clever move, balancing apology and artistic integrity. But the public didn't see it that way. In the following days, Good Morning America and The Today Show ran segments debating, should Ron Howard have cut that line? The controversy snowballed when CNN entertainment reporters caught up with Vaughn in Beverly Hills. He said shortly, "Comedy is where we laugh about our differences." Instead of calming things down, it made matters worse. Many felt he was dismissing social sensitivity altogether. Few knew that before The Dilemma, Vaughn already had a record of off-screen trouble. In 2001, he was arrested after a bar fight in Wilmington, North Carolina, alongside actor Steve Buscemi, who ended up hospitalized. In 2006, his relationship with Jennifer Aniston ended publicly, and paparazzi harassment led to fights. Within Hollywood, Vaughn had a reputation as the hot-tempered comic whose mouth moves faster than his mind. So when the line, "Electric cars are gay," aired, audiences didn't just hear a character, they heard Vaughn himself, blunt, brash, and defiant. Ron Howard, by contrast, was Hollywood's scandal-free director, an Oscar winner for A Beautiful Mind known for balance and diplomacy. Yet this time he stood in the crossfire, pressured by studios, activists, and the media on one side, and by the artistic principle of creative freedom on the other. Variety critic Peter Bart wrote, Howard is facing his greatest PR crisis since the Da Vinci Code. When The Dilemma premiered in January 2011, it made under $70 million, far below expectations. On Rotten Tomatoes, critics called it a misfired, tone-deaf story. What people remembered most wasn't the plot about two best friends, but the 6 words that rocked Hollywood. The incident led Vince Vaughn to virtually disappear from the spotlight for a year. He canceled interviews, withdrew from a planned comedy project, and only returned in 2012 with The Watch. As for Ron Howard, he chose silence, mentioning the event just once during a directing class at New York University, where he said softly, "Every controversy fades. What remains is the lesson about the boundary between freedom and respect." The electric cars episode ended there, but it marked the beginning of a series of challenges Howard would face with his actors in the years that followed. Within just a few years, another name would drag him into an even bigger storm. 3. Paul Bettany, the albino assassin who drew Ron Howard into a global storm of criticism. In May 2006, at the Cannes Film Festival, the Mediterranean heat was sweltering. Yet inside the Grand Theatre Lumière, the atmosphere was even more tense. Hundreds of journalists crowded in for the world premiere of The Da Vinci Code, the most anticipated film of the year from director Ron Howard. When the end credits rolled, instead of applause, the room fell silent. Then came a few sharp whistles, cold as a blade. The next morning, The Guardian and Variety ran headlines like, "Not what Hollywood expected." And the name appearing most frequently in print wasn't Tom Hanks. It was Paul Bettany, who played Silas, the pale monk who kills for his faith. In the E.E. film, Silas is an extreme member of the mysterious religious group Opus Dei. He believes that self-punishment purifies sin, and he's willing to take lives to protect what he calls God's truth. Paul Bettany's image, ghostly white skin, icy blue eyes, and blood-streaked scars on his back, became one of the most haunting visuals of 21st century cinema. Empire magazine wrote, "Silas is not just a character, but a visual obsession." But while audiences were captivated, medical and religious communities were outraged. Only days later, the National Organization for Albinism and Hypopigmentation, NOAA, released an official statement accusing Columbia Pictures and Ron Howard of reinforcing the ancient stereotype that people with albinism are monsters. The organization's president, Mike McGowan, told BBC News, "From The Matrix Reloaded to Cold Mountain, Hollywood keeps turning albino characters into villains. The Da Vinci Code just continues that list." Meanwhile, major outlets like CNN International, Reuters Television, and Sky News broadcasted the story widely, turning it into a heated ethical debate about the responsibility of filmmakers. The storm grew worse when the global Catholic Church got involved. In Manila, more than 5,000 worshippers gathered outside cinemas holding signs that read, "Stop the blasphemy." In Egypt and Jordan, the film was banned completely. In India, the National Film Board demanded that 15 minutes be cut. Even the Vatican issued a rare statement declaring that the movie hurt the faith of millions. On American television, shows like Larry King Live and Good Morning America repeatedly discussed the fine line between creativity and religious offense. The New York Times described The Da Vinci Code as the most fiercely protested film since The Last Temptation of Christ in 1988. Amid the uproar, Ron Howard held an emergency press conference in London. He explained, "Silas doesn't represent anyone. He's just a man lost in his faith." But the clarification didn't help. Critic Anthony Lane from The New Yorker wrote, "Silas is too powerful, too haunting. Audiences forget he's fictional." Howard, long known for his calm and clean image, suddenly found himself at the center of global outrage. Paul Bettany, then in his early 30s, also faced immense pressure. On BBC Radio 4, he shared that each shooting day required 3 hours of makeup, and he performed the self-punishment scenes himself. "I got real bruises. The whipping scene left my back sore for weeks," Bettany said, half-jokingly, but few were amused. Online, he was labeled as a man profiting from religious violence. Some extremist groups even sent threats to his London agency, forcing him to cancel interviews and stay out of the public eye for 2 months. Ironically, only a few years earlier, Ron Howard had been the one who gave Bettany his breakthrough role in A Beautiful Mind, 2001. They had grown close, with Howard once saying, "I see in Paul a kind of pain and depth few actors possess." When the Da Vinci Code became a scandal, Howard immediately stepped forward to defend him. On CNN's Larry King Live, he stated, "Paul was just doing his job as an actor. He made Silas frighteningly real." But that defense only pulled Howard deeper into the controversy. At the same time, tabloids fanned the flames by digging into Bettany's personal life. In 2003, he married Jennifer Connelly, his co-star from A Beautiful Mind. However, papers like the Daily Mail and The Sun brought back rumors that their relationship began while Connelly was still dating photographer David Dugan. Some even suggested that Ron Howard favored Paul because of Connelly, an unproven claim, but scandalous enough to turn a professional controversy into tabloid drama. Despite being attacked by hundreds of critical articles, the Da Vinci Code triumphed at the box office, making over $760 million worldwide. Yet the financial success came at a heavy cost. Ron Howard's artistic reputation suffered deeply. Variety called it the most divisive film of Howard's career, while Entertainment Weekly quoted him saying, "I've never had to spend so much time explaining a film before." In the end, Howard and Bettany's friendship endured, but it was never quite the same. They worked together again on Angels and Demons, but avoided joint interviews. Bettany later admitted, "I sometimes wondered if Ron ever regretted choosing me." That single line summed up the quiet tension between two men who had shared both glory and the weight of public condemnation. The Silas incident eventually faded, but it left Ron Howard with a painful lesson. One creative choice in character design could ignite a global crisis. And just as the storm settled, another wound emerged. This time, not from cinema, but from television, where an old friend unintentionally made Howard feel overshadowed on his own show. 4. Henry Winkler. When the Fonz left Ron Howard feeling alone on his own show. In the mid-1970s, American television entered a golden era. Every Tuesday night, millions tuned in to Happy Days, a sitcom about the Cunningham family's life in Milwaukee. At the time, Ron Howard was considered the show's anchor. He played Richie Cunningham, a gentle, kind young man, the very face of post-war American youth. But everything began to change after a few seasons when a supporting character stole the EEDU spotlight. Henry Winkler as the leather-jacketed mechanic Arthur Fonzie Fonzarelli. No one expected Fonzie, initially written as a humorous side character, to become a pop culture phenomenon. From 1975 to 1977, Happy Days shot to the top of the Nielsen ratings, beating even MASH and All in the Family. Kids imitated Fonz's slicked-back hairstyle. Young men across America wore leather jackets, rode motorcycles, and greeted each other with the trademark "I." Henry Winkler appeared 3 times in one year on The Tonight Show, starring Johnny Carson, and graced the covers of Rolling Stone and TV Guide under the headline, "The Coolest Man on TV." Meanwhile, Ron Howard, once the heart of Happy Days, began to fade from view. Reporters like Mary Murphy from the Los Angeles Times wrote bluntly, "Fonzie owns the audience, and Richie is just a shadow." Behind the scenes, the atmosphere shifted. Every interview, every promotion revolved around Winkler. Fans flocked to the Warner Brothers lot, not to see Howard, but the Fonz. The soft-spoken Ron started to retreat into himself. The breaking point came in 1977, when ABC executives discussed renaming the show Fonz's Happy Days to take advantage of the character's huge popularity. According to producer Gary Marshall's memoir, My Happy Days in Hollywood, Ron stayed silent for a few seconds before standing up and saying just one sentence. "If they change the name, I'm leaving the show." The room went silent. The idea was immediately dropped. But from that day on, the relationship between the two stars was never the same. Crew members remembered that Ron began leaving the set right after filming, no longer staying for lunch or small talk. Winkler, on the other hand, grew even busier with fame, signing endorsement deals, writing self-help books about Fonzie confidence, and even giving talks at Harvard. The New York Times' Dave Itzkoff described Henry Winkler as having stepped out of the screen to live as his own character, a man unaware he was at the height of television power. Rumors soon followed. Some anonymous writers told Variety that Winkler often requested script changes to expand Fonz's scenes. In one case, an episode focused on Richie was shortened because Fonzie didn't have enough lines. Winkler denied it, but Howard was clearly hurt. A crew member told The Hollywood Reporter, "Ron never complained, but everyone noticed how quiet he became whenever the audience cheered only for Fonzie after the director called cut." This wasn't just a rivalry for attention. It was a clash of personalities. Howard, who had grown up in the industry, valued discipline and structure. Winkler was spontaneous and full of energy. Journalist Barbara Walters once said on air, "Ron was like the big brother trying to keep order, and Henry was the little brother who just discovered how to make the world cheer." Off-screen, Winkler's private life also drew tabloid buzz. In 1978, a Los Angeles gossip paper claimed he had a close friendship with a guest actress, putting his marriage to Stacy Weitzman under scrutiny. Both denied it, but the National Enquirer kept bringing up the story for years. Meanwhile, Ron Howard married his high school sweetheart, Cheryl Alley, and was expecting his first child. People magazine described them as Hollywood's model couple, unintentionally creating a contrast between rebellious Fonzie and wholesome Richie. By 1979, Winkler's fame began to level off. Audiences tired of the repetitive Fonzie image, while Howard quietly prepared for a new path. In 1980, he announced his departure from Happy Days after 7 seasons to pursue directing. He told Entertainment Weekly, "I want to tell my own stories, not just play the good guy in a world where everyone's trying to stand out." Winkler stayed for 3 more seasons, but the magic had faded. When Happy Days ended in 1984, Fonzie disappeared along with an era. Years later, at the show's 30th anniversary reunion in 2004, Henry Winkler walked up to Ron Howard on stage and hugged him, saying before hundreds of fans, "You were the heart of the show." I never forgot that. The audience stood in applause, but those who remembered the old days knew that it took nearly 3 decades for that rift to truly heal. Ironically, the experience of being overshadowed by Fonzie became a turning point that shaped Ron Howard's resilience as a filmmaker. In an interview with The Hollywood Reporter, he said, "The day I left Happy Days, I knew I never wanted anyone else writing my lead role again." From that moment, Howard shifted behind the camera, eventually becoming the Oscar-winning director everyone knows today. Yet before reaching those heights, he would face more difficult encounters. This time, not with a young rising star, but with a seasoned veteran known for his stubbornness on the set of Cocoon. 5. Wilford Brimley, the man who nearly drove Ron Howard crazy on the set of Cocoon. In 1985, Hollywood was swept up in a wave of science fiction films. While audiences were obsessed with Back to the Future and The Goonies, a young 31-year-old director named Ron Howard chose to tell a gentler story about aging and miracles, Cocoon. No one expected that this heartwarming film would turn into a silent battlefield between Howard and Wilford Brimley, one of the most strong-willed actors in America at the time. Brimley, then in his early 50s, was already a familiar face in American cinema, having starred in The Natural, 1984, alongside Robert Redford. A former Marine who had worked as a ranch hand, horse wrangler, and security guard, he carried the aura of a man hardened by life, honest, blunt, and stubborn. He had never studied acting formally, but audiences loved his raw, authentic performances. Ron Howard, on the other hand, was a methodical, formally trained young director who followed every line of the script. Their generational and stylistic differences made clashes inevitable. According to the Los Angeles Times, conflict erupted during the very first week of filming in St. Petersburg, Florida. It happened during the key scene where the elderly characters discover the rejuvenating pool. Howard wanted Brimley to express surprise and emotion as he felt his youth return. But Brimley, with his thick southern drawl, flatly refused. He argued that an old man who's lived long enough doesn't panic anymore. He just smiles and accepts it. Without waiting for Howard's approval, Brimley dropped his lines, looked straight into the camera, and gave a faint smirk. The take had to be reshot entirely, costing nearly $200,000. Cinematographer Don Peterman later recalled, "Ron tried to stay calm, but Wilford didn't care. He told him straight, 'I'm not your puppet, Ron.'" It didn't stop there. Brimley was notorious for his fiery temper. He hated waiting, and once threw a coffee mug at the wall when the crew changed shooting locations at the last minute. A production assistant told The Hollywood Reporter, "One day he yelled at the assistant director saying, 'Don't tell me how to play an old man. I've lived it.'" Ron Howard, overwhelmed, would step outside to smoke and cool down, while the entire crew held their breath in fear he might explode. Off-set, Brimley was already a media fixture. He was famous for his wholesome Quaker Oats commercials, the friendly uncle urging people to eat healthy breakfasts. But behind that warm image, he was brutally honest and occasionally startling in interviews. In 1997, he publicly criticized younger actors for never having truly broken a sweat, earning him the nickname the Grumpy Old Man of Hollywood. By 2009, he unexpectedly became an internet meme when a video of his political speech opposing healthcare reforms went viral, thanks to his distinctive pronunciation of the word diabetes. Back in 1985, tensions on the Cocoon set kept rising. Brimley often ignored direction to do things his own way. Ironically, his defiance gave the film a greater sense of realism. In the final scene, when his character boards a spaceship leaving Earth, Brimley changed his expression on the spot. Instead of emotional tears as written, he looked calmly into the distance, as if peacefully accepting his fate. The moment left everyone silent, and Howard later admitted, "It was the right choice, even if it wasn't mine." After filming wrapped, Howard approached Brimley to shake his hand at the farewell lunch. A crew member told Variety that Brimley simply said one chilling line, "You did good, kid, but don't ever tell me how to live." That sentence stayed with Howard for years. Despite their heated clashes, Cocoon became one of Howard's biggest successes. It won 2 Oscars, including Best Supporting Actor for Don Ameche, and made over $85 million, a huge number at the time. Critic Roger Ebert wrote, "It's Brimley's sincerity that makes the miracle believable." In an odd twist, the man who nearly drove Howard crazy helped him win his first major Hollywood recognition. Brimley went on to reprise his role in Cocoon, The Return, 1988, but refused to join the promotional tour. At a small press event in Dallas, he bluntly said, "I hate the media. In Hollywood, people only tell the truth when the microphone runs out of batteries. The remark caused another stir, but for Brimley, it was just his way. Blunt honesty to the end. Their story didn't end in bitterness, but in mutual understanding. Yet, for Ron Howard, it was only one of many lessons in the rough road of directing. Learning to manage the massive egos of Hollywood. Less than 2 decades later, a far greater storm would again pull his name into the heart of global controversy. 6. Jeffrey Tambor, the actor who asked Ron Howard to stay silent about his misconduct toward Jessica Walter. In early 2018, Hollywood was no longer the land of glamorous award shows. It had become the epicenter of a reckoning known as Me Too. One by one, once powerful figures were being accused, from producers to A-list stars. In that climate, no one expected Ron Howard, long considered one of Hollywood's most honorable and disciplined directors, to be swept into controversy because of a man he trusted completely. Jeffrey Tambor. At the time, Tambor, then 73, was a respected veteran. He had won 2 Emmys for Amazon's Transparent and was hailed by critics as the man who turns anger into art. But that very art of anger became his downfall. In November 2017, Variety and Deadline Hollywood broke shocking news. 2 of Tambor's colleagues on Transparent, Trace Lysette and Van Barnes, accused him of inappropriate conduct on set. Public outrage erupted, and Amazon quickly launched an investigation. 3 months later, Tambor was dismissed, though he continued to deny all allegations. The story might have ended there, but in May 2018, the New York Times published an exclusive roundtable interview with the cast of Arrested Development, the series for which Ron Howard served as both producer and narrator. The session, held at the paper's Manhattan office, unexpectedly became one of the most talked-about media moments in Hollywood history. Midway through the interview, veteran actress Jessica Walter, who played Lucille Bluth, suddenly broke down in tears. Through sobs, she revealed that Jeffrey Tambor had once yelled at her harshly on set. "I've been in this business for 60 years, and no one has ever screamed at me like that before," Walter said, her voice trembling. The room fell silent. Reporter Sopan Deb of the New York Times, who witnessed it all, later described the atmosphere as heavy as stone. Tambor sat quietly, staring at the table, while his 3 male co-stars, Jason Bateman, Tony Hale, and David Cross, tried to downplay the moment, saying it was just a creative misunderstanding. The public saw it differently. When the interview video was released, social media exploded. Outrage flooded Twitter with the hashtag #CharterJusticeForJessica. Viewers condemned the men for interrupting a crying woman, while Tambor sat silent, and criticized Ron Howard as the show's producer for not speaking up. Major outlets like CNN Entertainment, The Guardian, and The Hollywood Reporter ran headlines such as "Ron Howard silent as Jessica Walter recounts on-set abuse," an indirect accusation of his inaction. In truth, Tambor's temper had been notorious for decades. During the Larry Sanders Show in the 1990s, he once erupted mid-shoot over the lighting setup. A crew member told Los Angeles Magazine, "Jeff could be laughing 1 second and shouting the next over something tiny. He believed anger helped him reach true emotion." For Ron Howard, who prized discipline and respect, that volatility was both fascinating and dangerous, a spark that could ignite chaos at any moment. After the New York Times interview went viral, Netflix, the distributor of Arrested Development, canceled its London press tour just 2 days before departure. On BBC Newsnight, journalist Emily Maitlis commented, "This is a slap in the face for Hollywood's long tolerance of powerful men's tempers." Tambor later appeared on Entertainment Tonight, saying he was ashamed of how I behaved, but insisted everything was exaggerated. Ron Howard stayed silent. He held no press conference and released only a brief statement to the media. Every set should be a place of respect and safety. The neutral tone backfired. Variety wrote, "Silence when others are hurt is no longer humility. It's indifference." The man once praised as Hollywood's moral compass was now criticized as too gentle to manage difficult people. The fallout spread quickly. Tambor lost sponsorships, was dropped from 2 independent films, and disappeared from public life for nearly a year. Meanwhile, Jessica Walter became a new icon of empowerment. In an interview with Entertainment Weekly, she said, "I don't want anyone destroyed. I just want people to learn kindness." For Ron Howard, accustomed to resolving conflicts with calmness, it was the first time he faced moral pressure from the public. In a 2019 Variety interview, he admitted, "I've realized that silence isn't always the safe choice. Sometimes silence is just another form of cowardice." The remark was described as a belated confession, but at least it showed he was willing to reflect. Still, Howard's storms were far from over. After years of clashes with seasoned actors, he would soon face a new kind of test. One not from a veteran, but from a young performer of a new generation, Jackson Rathbone, who later confessed that his audition with Ron Howard left him crying in his car for half an hour. Who do you think pushed Ron Howard to his breaking point? Was it Tom Hanks turning his back, or Jeffrey Tambor dragging him into the Now Me Too storm? Or perhaps Wilford Brimley, the tough old man who nearly made him abandon the set? Leave your thoughts below and tell me which name shocked you the most in this list. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications so you won't miss any behind-the-scenes stories from Hollywood.